evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. And I'm George Binns. And we're continuing the series of discussions with our local politicians about the state of the city. And this evening, to help us understand it better, we have the councilor from Ward 1, Todd Rotondo, who's also the Vice President of the City Council. So thank you for joining us, Todd.
George, thanks for having me here tonight.
And I guess the question comes down to there's a lot of stuff going on, especially on the periphery or in the middle of Ward 1. We got two bridges out. We were going to do the Bass River overlay that somewhat affects Ward 1. And they were going to dredge the river. And a lot of these things aren't really happening. So what do you think is going to be the result of all this?
So there is a lot going on right now, George, in Ward 1, and it's abuts 2 and 3, right? So, let's talk about the two bridges we have, Kernwood and we have the Hall Whitaker. We all know Hall Whitaker's closed. We know that there's been a lot of meetings with the people, but as well as internally with the city and state officials, even with federal officials. There's been many meetings to see what's the best way of getting a better timeline, to try to move it a little quicker than what's been presented so far. The state has heard loud and clear the people at those public meetings, knowing that these bridges are very, it's such a necessity to have them here because of the traffic that's being created on Elliott Street now, what's being created within the neighborhoods because of the detouring of the traffic, the inconveniences, but the safety is the first priority of the state. The state also knows that the Kernwood Bridge needs to be at least fixed to the point where it's going to extend the life until the Hall Whitaker temporary or whatever is deemed to be put in place for traffic vehicular, because those are very instrumental to each other. In order for them to work on the Kernwood Bridge, which was programmed first, which is funny to hear, knowing the Hall Whitaker's closed, and I think that's where people were sort of taken by surprise, is you got the bridge closed, but yet you're saying the Kernwood Bridge needs to be done first. Yeah. Kernwood Bridge is in as tough shape. So right now they are, as you may have seen, there was a press release put out by MassDOT that they're working on a schedule to start doing work right now. We may not see all of it. Boat traffic's being affected right now. They're doing some work on the underneath side. There may be times where there's going to have to be work done on the decking and on the pilings, some electrical work on the Kernwood Bridge that may require, one-lane traffic, or there may even be times, unfortunately, they have to shut the bridge down. They're going to do everything MassDOT they can to not have to do that, but nothing's guaranteed. When that bridge is completed to extend the life temporarily, hopefully the Hall Whitaker will stop being worked on. Part of the problem with the Hall Whitaker is it's the permitting process. We've seen 24 months, which is going through the DEP, the state, as well as the Army Corps of Engineers, and then the Coast Guard. And the other part is because it's navigational waters, we do have to, or the state has to answer to the Coast Guard. But then there's also the environmental piece where the marine life is there, and there's the spawning of the flounders, and so that kind of limits the construction period of even the temporary bridge. So it may, instead of getting it done in a quicker one season, it may take 2 seasons, which puts it that way.
Well, you mentioned a couple of things that still bother me about the process. One is that when our local Congressman Seth Moulton took the tour, standing out there with the umbrella, he made a comment that said, "We already got a permit for this bridge. Why do we need another one? And why do we need one for a temporary one?" And I don't know that that's being explored as much as it could be. And you mentioned my other favorite, the Corps of Engineers. And I've used this several times before, and I probably sound like a broken record, but when I was one of the big kids that went off to camp, I was a combat engineer. My battalion happened to have a bridge company. I think they all do. And our bridge company was a floating bridge company. But I was trained on how to put together a Bailey bridge. And I think that it could be installed very quickly and temporarily, and a Bailey Bridge will support an 80-ton tank, a 40-ton tank, or maybe even a 60-ton. So it's not something flimsy, and it's something that the state of Connecticut used when the hurricane took out part of one of the bridges on I-95. So I'm thinking that there are options available, and that this permitting process bothers me, that it's a paper problem. And why does it take 18 months to solve a paper problem?
So you're not hearing a disagreement out of me on
No,
this,
I
George.
know.
So to speak of the Bailey Bridge, that is probably what a temporary bridge would look like.
Yeah.
That we know, right? We know physically that the Army Corps of Engineers is more than competent and capable of building a bridge quickly. It's the environmental issues within the waters that we have to address, which is sort of the bureaucracy, right? But as well as the 18 to 24-month permitting, meaning is making sure some steps the state can probably get done quicker. Some things are required to have certain amounts of time. I can clearly state from the city side as well as our state legislatures, Representative Paracella and Senator Lovely and Mayor Cahill, going to them and saying, are there ways that we can make sure that everything's staying on schedule and making sure that we're on top of it? And they've been doing all the advocacy with that. So it is a bureaucracy thing.
Yeah.
You know, to have Congressman Moulton come out late in the game and making those statements is great. You're right. They shouldn't take that long.
Yeah.
But the reality is those statements we've been saying since day one.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he coming to the game is great, and we hope for his advocacy, because a lot of these are the federal agencies that are slowing the process
Yeah,
down.
somebody needs to make something happen.
And I would think it would be, you know, and to the mayor's credit as well as Mass Daughters, we have had meetings with Senator Warren and Senator Markey's office as well to say, hey, listen, we need your partnership to help move this process quicker, to make sure that if, you know, the processing is in this position right now, that we're not missing timelines, because there are timelines. Again, if you recall, and we can talk about the dredging report, you know, the dredging was going to happen, I believe, right now.
Yeah.
At this time of the year for a short time, and then they'd have to pull out, because again, it's the environmental of the marine life that's living there. You know, it seems, you know, and I think this is sort of what Moulton was referring to, is we seem to give more thought to the marine life than we do to the vehicular or the you know, people traveling
It's
over
not
the bridge.
It's the people that are
Inconvenienced.
100%.
100%.
And so that's, I think, ought to be very high, if not the very top of the list on all of these advocacy groups. But anyway,
We agree. I don't know if all the environmental groups would agree with us, right?
know.
So I think that's the biggest thing. But I agree. I think the truth is, you know, I had phone calls. Why, you know, Florida can do Sanibel and they can do Marcos Island, and why are we not able? We are, but we don't have the same situation here, because down there that was a true emergency where there were people deserted on an island. This is a true inconvenience, but we still have access to the downtown. It's just it's a pain to get to.
yeah. And it's the same thing with the Bass River overlay, that it sounded like a good idea. In fact, from my perspective, that's probably the first area that should have been developed, because it's right next to the train station. And all of a sudden, with a lot of activity last fall, and now that thing is, I don't know, it's in limbo again.
So the master plan calls for the Bass River Overlay District several years now. I mean, this
Yeah,
is going back
it's
2000.
a 10-year program.
Even longer than that, right? So it's gone back even further.
Okay.
So the Bass River Overlay was before my time that was being considered. And you're right, it makes what they called as the TOD. Back in what Romney had created that district, you know, the transit-oriented development to build housing around the train station to cut down on cars and, you know, for commuters and stuff. And then the mayor had presented, I think back in 2017-18, it had gotten, and then I think with public outcry with all the building on Rantoul Street. Now, I don't know why no one went to look at the overlay district first at the Bass River overlay. I don't know the reason. Why did Rantoul get done first? Maybe because the real estate
Well, I
was
think
cheaper.
part of the problem might have been that the Bass River overlay depends upon the shutting down the bowling mat, and also the car wash that were integral parts of the overlay problem or program.
So I mean, the overlay obviously would allow for them to stay still in existence if they chose to, right? The overlay is to
Yeah.
allow it's currently there,
Yeah.
and then add the layer of residential to it. I don't know if the real estate was cheaper on Rantoul Street, so when Windover or Beverly Crossing started
Yeah.
purchasing property, it was cheaper to buy on Rantoul Street, which, everyone has to admit, whether we like the development and however we feel and stand on the issue, but if you look at the streetscape between the 1A project being done and as well as all these new apartments being up there, it looks nicer. I mean, I don't know if there's anyone to really disagree with that. And then, even to go a little further into it is the private homeowners, keeping up with the Joneses, improved their properties and, the values have gone
Yeah.
up. Overlay district, obviously the mayor had presented it last year. It became an outcry in Ryleside. Even though it's not on Ryleside's side, it actually probably impacts them the most
Yeah.
because you have the two
Because
major
you're going to
routes.
catch all the traffic.
Exactly, 62 and Route and then Bridge Street.
Yeah.
And so, what happened was this being presented to the public, to the mayor. It's been a project we've been talking about for years, right? But the people have just moved into Ryleside. Now I've been a council for 3 years, and I can tell when I first ran, new families have moved into Ryleside in the last 4 or 5 years. It's changed. So to them, hearing this project is brand new to them.
Yeah.
So to them, it's like, well, you're rushing this project, when in essence it's been discussed for so long. So it's kind of reintroducing the project.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we had the pandemic happening.
Yeah, that screwed up lots of things.
Well, it even changed our work habits, right? So people are now
yeah.
doing telecommuting. Everything that we've always discussed, saying is, could it be done or not be done? Well, we were forced to do it, which proved that hypothetical question now is, yeah, we're doing it. We're finding technology, Zoom, Google Meet. We've been able to do meetings now. We're not having the new interaction that we used to. Well, now we're saving money on office space. The commuting traffic has decreased considerably.
Oh, yeah.
We're seeing even most recent report from the MBTA that they're comparing to pre-COVID how far down it is that the commuter has not even come to close to what ridership was and how much a quarter of their revenue is decreased. But do we now start going off of a new benchmark of what the ridership should look like, now that we've, coming out of the pandemic?
Yeah.
So it kind of, when I hear from Ryleside, is like we can't necessarily use the transit-oriented development as an argument anymore because we're not seeing the commuters. You look at the Depot restaurant parking lot. It's not full like it used to be.
No.
My wife used to travel into Boston when she worked there, and I remember sitting there twice a year in the parking lot waiting to get the parking pass for the season.
Yeah.
Those aren't like that anymore. So the habits have changed. And the mayor stated and has stayed true to his word that at that meeting is when the bridge closed unexpectedly in June of last year, and people said this, we want a traffic study to show how it's going to affect Bridge and Elliott Street. Well, you can't give us a traffic study without the bridge being open, and even if you're able to take other current numbers and manipulate them, people in Ryleside weren't going to trust those numbers because it's not physically being done.
Yeah.
And the mayor said, we're going to put that on the shelf for now, and we're going to wait. But the mayor with the planning department created a design standard committee which looked at the overlay district as well as design standards. Councilor Rand and I sat on that as councilor appointments because it made sense. It abutted 2 and 1. And all of that design standards have been done by the company as well as the overlay district. And they've been sort of sent out to us now. But those are already there to kind of say, this is what it could look like, and there's different scenarios, and it still needs to be presented out of the planning department. It's just not there yet.
Yeah.
So there's a lot is going on. It just hasn't been done fully vetted out.
Yeah, that's the other thing I think a lot of people don't recognize, that there's a lot of activity in the city. The charter is up for discussion and decision. At the same time, there's a lot of talk about rezoning the downtown area, mostly in Ward 2, along Cabot Street, because all of a sudden somebody decided that, hey, by right, by the zoning that's in existence, I can build a 5-story building, and that's what I'm going to do. And that's underway. And technically, there's no way to stop that one. And I think several other people have seen the handwriting on the wall and they're starting to say that, oh, I got some valuable property here if it can be built to 5 stories. So I'm going to put in for it right now and claim a prior commitment, even if you change the zoning. So there's going to be some 5-story buildings still being built, regardless of what the zoning has changed. And I sat through the subcommittee meeting that you were exploring with the zoning, and I think one of the points that you brought out that was worth discussing is, yeah, you can do something on Cabot Street and make it look new and bright and shiny. You've made Rantoul Street look new, bright and shiny. The area in between, there's a lot of people living there that they would like to stay there. They don't want to have to be forced into selling out to somebody who's going to take over their property and put it in a 5-story. So one of the issues that comes up when looking at the zoning changes, what about the people that are already in that area? What are you going to do to them? And I think that's something that sort of gets lost in the discussion until you brought it up.
So, again, there's 4 pieces to this whole zoning or this whole issue that we've been discussing for the last 2 years, 3 years. There's the design standards, which are still sitting in there that we need to discuss. There's the whole MBTA 3A compliance that, it's the opinion of the city that we're close to it anyways, if not there already.
Yeah.
Then there's the ADU, which we still haven't discussed. And then, of course, the zoning that we've discussed.
What's an ADU?
Accessory dwelling units or in-law apartment. I'm sorry, my apologies.
Yeah.
But anyways, there's 4 pieces in my opinion, right? And so we're kind of going backwards on this. We should have seen the design standards, at least to see what it should
What's
look
the
like.
overall plan
Right,
look
what's
like?
going to look like. Like we see, and what I hear from people is, I just don't want to see another box building going up. Well, the design standards, which right now we only have design guidelines, which don't tell the developer what to do. And so, the standards haven't been presented yet. And then, of course, like I said, the whole MBTA 3A, which says is that each community within the area of an MBTA, bus route, train route, commuter rail, has to have X amount of housing. And I think we're almost, if not, like I said, we're
Yeah,
already
it's
there.
multi-family
Right.
housing.
And then, so that means is, how much more do we need to create the zone to get there? Or if we're already there, do we need to really tweak it, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, like I said, Councilor St. Hilaire had presented the 35 across the board,
Yeah.
likely, which created us to have the conversation, which then the mayor presented us with the current plan. And so the current plan shows the mayor presented from the planning department that Cabot Street would be 45 feet, 55 on Rantoul. In between, where you're talking about the RHD, I believe, or RMD, is that the height should be no more than 40 feet. And then Council Sweeney had mentioned that where he lives there, that he doesn't want 3 or 4 parcel land and then build up these large buildings to sort of transition into that. So that would address the height of 40 feet, which is close to what sometimes these 3-family homes look
Three-decker,
like,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You got the McLean building right on Federal Street that's already, I believe, 4 or 5 stories high. St. Mary's as well has got 3 stories there already, so they're sort of high already. But that zoning in place where we adopt it sort of transitions it from 45, keeps it 40, and then 55 on Rantoul.
Yeah.
One of the planning board members made a very good point to me and said, you look at Rantoul Street, it's more like an avenue, and Cabot Street's more of a street, and it has that characteristic.
Yeah.
Now,
Well, you also run into the problem that Ward 5, Councilor Feldman, that's a lot of commercial buildings, and limiting them to 3 stories is a no-no. So 35 feet, the whole city runs into problems, anything we want to develop along 128.
and I agree. I think the idea what Council St. Hilaire presented is the 35 across the board allowed us to have a bigger conversation about
Yeah,
it.
it's a starting point.
Right, and so tonight we have a meeting coming up for council where the zoning will be discussed, and I have to assume that Council St. Hilaire will present his 35 feet. Now, whether that's adopted, but it allowed for the conversation to start with the councils, right?
They got everybody talking about it, which is, I think, the important thing is everybody started to bring out all their concerns.
and we're not hearing it on social media, right? So people posting their distaste, disdain for the high buildings, and this now let people know that we are hearing you as city officials, as elected officials, and we need to address this and really put this in perspective.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed is I subscribe on social media to blogs, Architects Daily, and 2 articles in there that came up that caught my eye. One was they had an article about the 20 important buildings in Copenhagen. And you think about Copenhagen, it's an ancient city. It's got a lot of stuff in there. It must have a lot of stuff in there that is worth preserving because that's the history of the city. And yet you look at the buildings and they're all ultra-modern. Then the other one that caught my eye was there was an article about the architect that did the addition on the Peabody Museum, Peabody and Essex Museum. And in 1967, he designed the housing units for the athletes at the Montreal Olympics. And it was a design of big boxes cast in place in concrete, picked up and stacked all around. And it was a very innovative design. So I think one of the things that I would like to see is, again, you're talking about the design standards, something has to be in there to say that, hey, we can do something in the modern vernacular. We're not stuck with clapboards everywhere. And there needs to be a little more flexibility. And I hate to say it, but more diversity. That's a funny word.
Well, so I agree. I mean, obviously the design standards allow the builders to know what the city's vision is, right? So we give the input. You and I could have total different tastes for all we know, right?
Yeah.
Right. No, but so for me, I like brick. That's just old school. Right? I love the whole Depot Square One building that was originally built. There's a few buildings on Rantoul, but there are other ones that I don't like. But then I talked to some of the younger generations who are moving into the city who absolutely love it.
Yeah.
And it blows my mind. The standards at least would give an idea of what can be like a patio, or how much how much green space needs to be created.
Yeah.
Certain materials, and that's what the design standards would require. The design, the way it is right now, it's sort of like interpretation. Is we look at what happened with the Casa de Luca building or Depot 2 or what, right? Well, how many times they go back to the drawing board, right? And that was the process that the public outcry became. But imagine if the developer was told and the architect was told is, here's what you have for standards, here's what you have to do, and they come back with a rendition of the drawing, and as well as preserving Casa de Luca building. And then they come and they say, okay, well, this is what we got. And then they can tweak it accordingly to what, I think it would have saved a lot of back and forth.
Well, it also makes the city much more attractive to developers, that if they can come in and work with the city and do something quickly instead of dragging it out forever, they're more amicable to coming up with a reasonable design quickly and get it in and over and done with. They're still playing with that building.
Right, and as well as I do, it's something like that it's costing the developer, not that it's our problem, but it costs the developer money each time they go to the planning board. You're having the attorney come, you're having the architect come, and then all of a sudden...
The delay is what probably costs them more money than anything. But speaking of delays, we've had about a half hour of fun, and you wanted to take this opportunity to speak to the audience. There they are, they're yours.
Thank you, George. So I just want to say I plan on running for re-election this spring. I hope that you will give me consideration if you vote. I hope that I continue to serve Ryle side, the Ward 1 residents. I know there's some newer sections within the Ward 1 area that I hope to have the opportunity to come out and really knock on your doors and meet with you. As the census has changed the boundaries of the Ward 1, It's been a great honor to serve you currently. I try to do the best I can. I think that, hearing your voices and your concerns, and I hope to bring that, continually to the full council. Again, I hope for that opportunity, and thank you for allowing me to announce that.
Okay, super. Well, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And you started to get into one of my favorite subjects, the Casa de Luca building, and all that free-for-all about preserving that, and the old train hotel that just kept that project going forever. And maybe we can do this again.
Absolutely.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining this evening. And you'll notice at the end of the credits is my email address. If you've got a question, a comment, or a different opinion, or better still, if you have an opinion you'd like to share with the audience, we can always make room for you here at the table. And thanks again for joining us. Stay tuned. We'll have more discussions like this.